my hair. And I'm just
Okay, so welcome back. This is Night Flight, and Eve Lorgen is back. She has been here a couple of times. Our website is evelorgen.com, and we are going to talk a little bit about the psychology of fear, conformity, and cowardice. So welcome,
yes.
welcome, Eve.
That's a big one, and it's certainly relevant to what's happening in the world, and even more so now. I think everything's being magnified. So I'll just go ahead and let you open with maybe what you're seeing in your neck of the woods in Europe, and how you see it kind of playing out, and maybe what insights you've been able to explore on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I would say when it comes to this conformity, in general, I guess people do not notice how old that really is. We are social beings. We have the desire to share, to be with others, and to exchange ideas, stories, whatever. And that is very, very ancient, because there was a time, let's say, if your tribe, your clan, or whatever, when they discarded you, and then it got really, really hard to survive on your own. Yeah, during those times.
Yes.
These days, if your family says, you know what, we no longer want to have anything to do with you, yeah, okay, that pains, but it does not necessarily mean your physical death. And so I think we really need to be aware of that, where that is really coming from, this because although it is nice to belong to a group, a clan, a tribe, it can be very, very oppressive, meaning there's always, if it's not balanced, it's always going, you know, it's always going to be a disaster.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. And I think that kind of reifies the understanding of the reality and depth of cultural conditioning as a deeply rooted thing that can be unconscious, that actually prevents us from our own freedom and our own, sovereignty, spiritual enlightenment, that it's something that is overlooked and blinds us. And it's amazing how that happens, maybe in some cultures more than others, but it is a survival mechanism. But the homogeneity of like the Eastern culture, let's say the Oriental culture, for example, is more homogeneous in its need to be in harmony with the group or with the family or with the main belief system and traditions. So much so that, because I've heard this because I've studied like Chi Gong and Taoist Oriental medicine, and there's a lot of really good things about the spirituality of Buddhism and Taoism and that kind of thing. But what is an overriding weakness in some of the cultures is the lack of an ability to, with the okayness, to individually express on an emotional heart level or a psychological level, when there's a need to express on a deeply human level for your ability to, let's say, even get well and to have your human needs met. So there's a denial of that kind of human need that's naturalized or normalized in certain cultures, so that it's not okay to express yourself emotionally individually, like maybe in a traditional Asian culture. Like, I'm a therapist, right? So I'm used to people coming to me to talk about all kinds of stuff, sometimes on deeply emotional levels, anger or grief or frustration or whatever it is. And it's okay to express, even in a group, like people from our own culture, especially, the 70s onward, where there was more of that openness in the West. But in other cultures, they don't have that operating, so that the resolution of those deeply held conflicts that is holding them down from true, what the Jungians would call individuation and sovereignty, integration, enlightenment, cannot occur. So it is kind of a blinded thing that is deeply ingrained in a cultural, you have to maintain the status quo of following the peer pressure expectations of those traditions, which in and of themselves, many of them I think are unhealthy, but there's good and bad qualities of that. And I'm just using that as an example, because if someone really wants to become enlightened and truly sovereign and truly free, you have to break through the barriers of getting down to your root core issues and being able to express that and explore that and be aware of it with another loving human being. You can't do this all alone. This is what I've learned. Yeah.
Exactly. And I would say that conformity is not always bad. Yeah, it's always, you know, how do I really operate in that construct? How do I do it? Let's say if family members all agree on something, you know, we from here on out, we do it that way because of this and that, and every family member says, yeah, okay, makes sense. We can all work together on this. Okay, fine. But there also comes a point when, yeah, let's say family members do not have the courage to express their real feelings. They might even marry somebody to please their parents. Yeah, regardless of if they are happy or not. And it can create a culture of this, I want to belong to something. It can have disastrous results. Yeah,
Absolutely. I agree 100%. I mean, in the old cultures, a lot of it was arranged marriages. And I think you see that more in the aristocratic families sometimes than, you know, the less aristocratic, where, and then you see, I mean, gosh, well, I get all the stories, right, from all the people like telling me about like family dysfunction and high levels of trauma and abuse and multi-generational abuse. And it's not just, you know, poor families and alcoholics and poverty, but a lot of times it's aristocratic lines that have some of the deepest narcissistic personality disorder, psychopathy, because of what happens in some of those bloodlines. So, I mean, this can get really huge. I think that one of the things that is a stumbling block that I've seen in some family systems where there was, let's say, abuse, and they have to keep it secret, right? You have to keep all this abuse secret. You know, don't air dirty laundry of the family, which you don't necessarily want to do that. But they emphasize the value of loyalty over integrity and truth and goodness. So that, well, above all, you must keep loyal to the family, loyal to keeping the secrets, which, you know, there could be like pedophiles and all this stuff going on, you know, the secret alcoholic, and they're not dealing with their stuff. They don't talk about the problems because that's shame-based. And so they just ruin the family line because of their sense of loyalty and hiding their shit and hiding their, because it's not okay to talk about and it's shame-based. And they've followed this narrative. And I say you have to question that, you know, where does it come from? And I've been able to explore this even in some of the higher level bloodline families that go back to the satanic, Luciferic controlled of the fallen angels, who are deliberately manipulating and creating belief systems, traditions, religions, you call it, and making the abuse secret in order to hold the secrets and to hold the power. So, you know, all this secrecy actually contributes to more abuse and less freedom for us all. So we have to find a way to release our secrets in a safe way so that we could truly recover and get out of the control system, which actually has a very dark core origin.
Yeah, but you know, stories like this, allegedly now on the internet there is another secret society, yeah, but this time a benevolent one, and they are going to liberate us. And you know, it's called something like the light system, something like that. And if you listen in, then it sounds like QAnon on steroids.
Yeah.
Yeah, in New Zealand, they had to lock it all down because they went in the bunkers
Oh,
rescuing the children, and there were so many bunkers. What nonsense is that? You know, any black ops doesn't require, yeah, a lockdown of the entire country. What nonsense is that? Have you ever seen a black ops that locked down an entire country?
I don't know. I mean, I question
No.
some of this. I mean, it's like, where's the evidence? Although,
Yeah.
you know, there really is a deep operation that has to take place. It has to be done in secrecy in order to be successful. And I would understand
Yeah,
that.
but Eve, you know, after years and years and years, all we have is some shitty footage, yeah, no clear image of anything, no interviews with the so-called rescued ones, nothing. We have no, and here, same story, yeah, a guy sitting there with a hoodie, no face,
Yeah.
yeah, totally, yeah. And so he is talking about all these operations, and I'm frozen. Yeah. Oh, I'm
I
unfrozen.
can hear
Okay.
you, although my video did freeze. So if it continues, I will just, you know what, I need to shut some windows so that I will have more bandwidth. So just hold on for a sec. I
Okay.
forget. It does happen sometimes. So let me do this. And
Yeah,
hopefully
and then the statement is, yeah, was a very successful operation. We cannot show you any footage, maybe later. And I'm hearing that for years, and I can't believe that people are still falling for that.
well, I mean, people want to believe that, you know, there is good behind the scenes. And, you know, this reminds me of some of the things that have occurred for probably under different window dressings and cultural belief systems. But this happened, you know, because I started my research in the early 90s or even before that, just my own exploration of, you know, the ET UFO phenomenon and what are these ET contactees of the 50s, 60s, 70s saying, what are the beings telling them when they visit them or when they're channeling them. You know, these things will happen. You have this special, you know, mission for this apocalyptic thing. You will be an ambassador for them. And I think someone even wrote a book years ago called When Prophecy Fails, when it's like one story after the next that tends to happen a lot with certain channel writings. And then it's the same kind of story that gets repeated through a type of, I think it's a type of deception that has, you know, they may change their storyline, but it's the same MO.
Yeah.
Of, we're doing all these wonderful things. All you need to do is just this and accept us and this and that. And then you look at the downward. Well, I mean, then this case in my book, I believe it's in The Dark Side of Cupid, called the Mariah and the Spirit Guide, where, you know, she was taken. She believed that, you know, it was good, but at the same time, there was these malevolent alien, and it was like this good and bad confusion, and then channeling beings, and then them showing her this, and that went into this like darker and darker spiritual deception. And one part of it, which maybe I'll talk more later, I mean, I'm kind of going off here, but where they would want her to basically have, you know, a spiritual marriage with this entity that's coming through her, that's a benevolent ET of some sort, and then have a spiritual child in the astral realm called a homunculus that will have a certain, you know, carry a certain power, that's a special child, or being driven to have a special hybrid child through these channeled spirit guide things, and then it turns into some other crazy, weird, demonic thing that they're leading them on a wild goose chase to do this agenda that makes you question later, because you look at their history, you know, 20 years down the road, what happened? And this is where research for decades will take you, like, wait a minute, okay, this person said this in the 90s and the 2000 and 2010. What's their life like now? What are their children and their grandchildren? Is this same thing going on? And what happened? And did this, what was it really benevolent? Did all their prophecies come true? You know, and a lot of it is like the same game being played over and over again. And so I question it, and you have to have evidence. And yeah, I mean, what could cause us to be more passive. And this is something that I've seen that really enraged me. And I think it's on another show. It was on James Bartley's show, where it was the theme was, enabling a narcissist is suicide. Okay.
Mhm.
So what we're doing macro scale is, are we enabling, the narcissists and the predators and the secret keepers, like everything's going to be fine. We're doing all this for you. We're benevolent. And so we don't have to fight and listen to the deep, deep inner original voice, which will say, wait a minute, I know what spiritual deception is because I'm connected to a direct connect with the Holy Spirit, with the heart of spirit of truth in the goodness of your heart. That's going to tell you, something's off here. It sounds nice, but something doesn't feel right. So we need to connect with that original awareness to give us a guidance when all things look well on the outside, but there's something ain't right. You know what I mean? This is what we say out here in the app. They ain't right. They don't know, they can't put their finger on it, but they just know. So we need to reintegrate and strengthen that original awareness, which is being gradually bred out of us, or the frog in the pot of boiling water. Everything's going to be okay. Pretty soon you're in this marriage with a narcissist and you lost your sense of identity and you're confused and you're vampirized and you're abused and you feel like there's no way out until you just don't even know what crap you're in. And I think the world is in a pile of crap, being completely abused by a demonic narcissist, more or less, under all these different political systems that are run by the higher level ones, hiding behind the scenes in and through different countries and different governments. And it's playing through a lot of this ET UFO stuff. And I hate to, be the bearer of something that doesn't sound positive and wonderful, but I don't think we can go towards the truly positive and wonderful truth unless we can recognize and root out this corruption and be able to recognize it, because the spiritual awareness is present to basically say, whoa, that doesn't feel right, and do something about it. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah. So I personally, anything that smells like lean back, grab your popcorn, watch the show, you are being liberated, I stay away from that.
Oh, God.
I know.
I don't eat popcorn. That's GMO anyway. Yeah. No, I'm just
So, and I simply, I don't understand this. How can anyone think that his or her personal liberation does not require participation?
That's a good
How can
point.
anyone believe that?
Yeah, and it's like a passivity program. And in fact, James Bartley even wrote about that way back years ago in our early research with some of the, what was then known as alien abduction, but they quickly turned into ET contact and visitation, whether or not it's volitional or under your awareness and what do you call it? Acceptance or consent. But they want to call it something so they don't feel like a victim, but they're falling into this passivity program of enabling so that the natural awareness is being suppressed. And it is a type of passivity program. And some of the greatest damage that I've been able to see, even as somebody who grew up in abuse, narcissistic abuse to the extreme, and where we understand the aspect, which is the complement of narcissistic abuse. We've talked about this before, the codependent kind of personality style that is more of a freeze fawn response, or a flight freeze fawn response, to try to do whatever you can to, like when you grow up under abuse, you have to learn how to pacify or be able to precog the behaviors and moods of a narcissist or a rageaholic or an alcoholic who's an abuser. So you always have to learn how to please them or become perfect or become invisible and become, so focused on them so they don't hurt you. So you lose your identity, and you become so focused on allowing them to be the narcissist and enabling them, then that causes worse abuse down the road. So I think we're seeing this macro where we're completely enabling out of fear and cowardice that, God forbid, if we open our mouth about maybe not agreeing with some of these mandates, which are absolute bioweaponized satanic bullshit. Okay. That, something bad will happen to us. So we have to just keep our mouth shut like quiet little mice and just hope we don't, get targeted and harassed and tortured even more, which we are. And so it gets to the point of like, how much am I willing to fight with what I have and not enable this? Because, the end result of enabling a narcissist and a predator and those who are deceived and who like to manipulate others is your own death and the death and destruction and corruption of your children. And of course, your entire community. So do you want to take responsibility for that? Because there is responsibility for being a passive victim, unfortunately.
Yeah, exactly. And all these Pied Pipers, I don't know. they have a lot of followers, unfortunately.
Oh yeah, and the more popular it seems, because I'm hearing about this all the time in my work, and a lot of it I have to keep confidential because I'm a therapist first, right? I'm a therapist, or I'm a whistleblower or a researcher. So I hear all these things and I'm like, oh my God, if I only knew, but I can't really say anything about it. I can only, direct them into a direction to take consideration. But the Pied Piper thing and what I'm calling like a kind of false light that may not even know it's a false light, that is I see it as a direct result of the unresolved complex trauma and the unresolved conditioning that is so deep that they don't realize what they have fallen into, and then promote this wonderful syrupy love and light shit, and they're really like predators in disguise who haven't dealt with their shit. And it's like, but you only know that when you maybe meet them and live with them for a while, or they, become investigated. And so the more popular they are, the more popular opinion tends to be the one that's swayed the most, if you ask me, but not necessarily. It's just, this is what we've learned, years ago. And I have to go back to me and James Bartley's work, as well as Karla Turner's and Barbara Bartholic and some other researchers, that it wasn't necessarily the numbers that are reporting something or the popular opinion. It was the handful of the lucid ones that got the best morsels of truth that was real and true. And they weren't necessarily the ones having a popular opinion or making money or getting the YouTube hits or selling books or whatever. So they tended to be the ones that, were battling a lot of warfare and, had their small circles of people that they could help and teach and to carry on that torch. But it wasn't ever a huge following. So this is why, and when there's a huge following of something, you always have to question, you just look at the bell curve. Okay, is the bell curve enlightened? Okay, what do you think, right? The enlightened ones are going to be on the 99th percentile or the 98th percentile?
No.
So
Yeah, and that hasn't changed up to this day.
Human nature, I guess. Although I think nature is changing in some ways, and that's part of the agenda, which connects with some of the, let's say, the darker fallen angel ETs masquerading as beings of light, whatever you want to call them, along with how it's progressing. And I would have to say that, it is going according to what a lot of scripture has said and is saying. And then I know that it sounds religious, but based on what I've heard, it gives credence to, if there are, let's say, satanic ritual abuse and some of these darker groups who are trafficking and torturing children and doing the human sacrifice and all that, practicing black magic and believing in Satan and the Antichrist, well, that means Christ is real. That means if the opposite is going on, obviously the other of that is true. And sometimes we find out the truth through seeing the darkness, and they're like, well, wait a minute, that's the counterfeit. Therefore, we know there must be a real. And let's find out what that real is, as opposed to its watered down, corrupted version.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you could look at that also as a savior program.
Yeah, I mean, it's programming. There's a lot of programs, but then again, I mean, as a therapist, even on a fundamental level, what I've noticed is that people generally don't become very well or integrated from complex trauma, or even enlightened, even from a yogic, Buddhist, mystic, saint, Christian perspective. They don't do it alone. They tend to have a good teacher or a process of working with others, learning more and more in order to get to that place of greater freedom and enlightenment and more goodness and purity of spirit that shines through. That we tend to have a teacher or a mentor who has helped us see things that we couldn't really do alone. So I think in the Western culture, we have a very strong bent towards this individualistic, I'm going to do it all. I'm going to be the entrepreneur and be successful and do it all alone, or be like the rebellious one where you rebel against the whole thing. And that's like the extreme polarized end of that. Really doesn't work either. So,
yeah. We have this Stanford prison experiment. Have you heard of that? Stanford prison experiment? Okay. They had a group of people. They divided them in prisoners and guards. And automatically, the people aligned to their assigned role. And it got so bad after a couple of days. The guards were so cruel to the prisoners. They forced them to sleep naked on the floor and deprived them of water, food, and they beat them up, so that the experiment had to be closed down a couple of days early.
what?
Yeah.
I didn't hear that. So the experiment was basically assigning roles to people and playing out these roles, and then watching how they descended into these roles regardless of ethical considerations.
Yeah.
Wow.
And it was not that they were pressured from outside. That is what I find the fascinating part about this. They simply assigned the role to them, and then they themselves interpreted their role.
Wow, that's really wild. You know what that reminds me of? But I mean, I don't know, I might be going on a limb here since I'm kind of psychological and spiritual, but when they go into a role and a character, a lot of times when we are in a role and a character of an identity, it's a form of non-lucidity. And you can know this, let's say if you're an advanced, meditator or spiritual practitioner or a lucid dreamer, you may come to understand that when there's an over-identification with identity or role, or falling in even into an archetype, then you kind of lose your lucidity and go all into the experience of that dominated identity, regardless of like an overview that has a better understanding of the whole. So I think when we fall into those roles and we end up non-lucid in the theater of the role, right? So it's interesting how maybe people who've been in actors and actresses, how they may have studied a role so well and fallen into like channeling an archetype, and then having a hard time getting out of it because it becomes so real and so imbued. It's like, or like an addiction or a current. You can't get out of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think there's something to that, because I've had reports of things, and this is in the dark side of Cupid, at least a little bit. And there's others, and it's kind of like out there, but it has to do with when someone, I don't know if they over-identify or they fall into an archetype. And then I think archetypes are real egregores of power and consciousness, even on a spiritual level, that someone can fall into. Let's say, I know sometimes they call it like the hero myth, and you fall into the hero or the different characters within the hero myth. I don't know if you've ever read that, but it's actually, it goes through stages and identified archetypes in the hero myth, where the hero might be.
And you have a similar thing in the tarot, in the great arcana. It starts with the fool, and then the fool develops. He goes through different stages. If you look at the
Oh.
Great Arcana, you have a similar thing. Yeah.
Yeah, or even within the Kabbalah, how it has different aspects of being and consciousness. I'm not a Kabbalist, but I know that there are real archetypes of power that when one connects with them, it can take you over, even like a channeled entity, where it would take over your normal personality, and you become imbued with this and you can't like stop it. So in the dark side of Cupid, there was a section of experiences which fell into some types of relationships where they felt like they were being manipulated by these qualities of the dark. It's really like a dark triad type of quality. And one of them was, one or other of the partners was really into, let's say, channeling an entity. And that channeled entity was kind of guiding them and very much manipulating and influencing them to go through these archetypal dramas of grand proportions of great illusion feeding, but it put them into these synchronistic dramas that are very real and undeniably supernatural in what was happening. That, like the Isis Osiris myth or the bridal mystic theme, or different, you're going to be the hero and you got to fight these forces of evil, and they put themselves into this great sense of importance in this role that's being thrusted kind of upon them to fall into by the manipulation of this entity that they're channeling. So I think there's something to that we don't have to fall into over identification. And I think that's a process that some people go through when they're exploring their spirituality, or even the psychological integration process of individuation, and they want to become sovereign, they want to be ascended, whatever, and they may fall into some of these things. So I don't know if it's necessary.
And what you said earlier about popularity, yeah, I know. In general, people think, oh, look, it has 200,000 views. It must be good. Yeah. So, and I'm not saying it's always bad. That is not what I mean. Yeah. So, and there was another experiment, not as gruesome as the Stanford prison experiment, but they gave people different songs and they had to rate them. Yeah. So this is my most favorite, and then this. So, and then they did the test again, but this time one part of the group could see how the others had voted.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So which songs were voted out. Yeah.
Okay.
And it turned out that 70% of the people changed their mind. And yeah.
Well, that kind of goes along with the strength of the pull of peer pressure and conditioning of being told, well, this is really good. Well, where they do this in entertainment industry, where they basically, tell you, who has talent, and they just choose it so they could manipulate a lot of their puppets. Not all of them. Some of them are very genuinely talented, but it makes you wonder, like, where the real truth can emerge from yourself without the influence of, am I going to be accepted, or should I be like them? And that's kind of scary when around 70%, that's a lot, It's like, oh my God.
But it is, I guess, almost, you could say, what we have experienced the last years, the last couple of years. So
yes.
I would say it's pretty accurate, this 70-30.
Yeah, you're right about that. It almost reminds me of the same kind of number, which is about a third or less than a third, which kind of corresponds with, some of the early Gnostic sayings, which I know they may be unpopular, about, the types of human, the clay, the pneuma, there was three different ones, like three different levels of the deeper the spirituality of the eternal nature, the higher the quality of refined essential goodness that would reflect. And then like the clay people who were just on the lower levels of consciousness had certain propensities that were predictable. But that was something that Malanga found in some of his work, which is kind of the alien abduction thing, but he kept coming into the, 25%, maybe 30 at the most, that tended to have like the higher qualities of awareness that seem to bring through the eternal spiritual awareness, consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And then, 2/3 tended to be, not as aware. And then 1/3 was definitely not of those qualities. So it makes you wonder about like this whole fallen angel thing, right? Where they took 1/3 of the angels with them. So there was 1/3 of definitely bad, and then 2/3 are like good. And then there's this war going on with how the 1/3 is going to manipulate as much as they can, while the other 2/3 are trying to maintain, equilibrium. And so I don't know, it's a common number, actually. Yeah.
You know what? Over the years, I have lost a little bit my patience towards,
Me too. Me too.
the conformists. Yeah.
Yes.
And but when I looked at those experiments, I thought, well, okay, that went very bad. We have also the Milgram experiment that is so horrific. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Where people had to release a electric shock, and they only heard screams, and then they were told to increase the electric shock until they killed them.
Well, it makes you like, the Nazi prison camp,
Yeah.
just following orders, kind of.
Yeah.
How far will our integrity go? Following orders. And it makes you wonder, do they really believe those orders are good? Are they really being able to use their deeper awareness beyond the illusion of what someone else is telling you? And that's a tough call. I mean, I think that's a psychological test that anybody who's been in an abusive relationship, let's say with a narcissist, where you are on the codependent end, enabling, and it was a very tough lesson to learn how you allowed abuse, not only of yourself, but maybe even your children, and normalized the abuser's behavior, which is completely unethical. But it's because, in hindsight, I'd say that it's because you never knew real love to begin with. So we're at a disadvantage when we've been raised and culturally conditioned to normalize, well, this isn't even love to begin with. This is like corrupted bullshit, which is completely, patriarchal or manipulative and abusive towards one gender. And, and you look at the political system of, the kings, and the serfs and the overtaxation. It's obviously corrupted. So sometimes you don't even know what love is until you've had to discover that through a lot of suffering and through some kind of spiritual, transpersonal experience, or have real love. So one of the things that I found helpful, and I came across this on YouTube with a really good complex trauma therapist named Tim Fletcher, and he's in Canada, and he works with a lot of trauma and addiction recovery things, but more with respect to complex PTSD, which he calls complex trauma, and the recovery thereof, and being able to finally, define the nuances and the characteristics of that which is not healthy, basically, and good, and then being able to come to a definition and recognition of, well, this is what love is. This is what, let's say, good parenting style is. This is what a healthy child should grow up with, and this is how we would want to be in relationships. And when you see, he did a video called "What is Love," and it's real plain and simple, and it's like, oh my God, I didn't know this. I didn't necessarily experience this. And so it might be considered an ideal, but many of us just plain do not know, really.
Yeah. Yeah, but when I looked at those experiments, and I thought, yeah, okay, look, if it is that easy to manipulate people that are not under any pressure, then
boy.
I guess you have to cut them a slack. Yeah, because the fear pressure and, the conformity pressure and, the virtue signaling and what have you, that was really intense. Yeah. So, and when I compared that, I thought, yeah, okay, it's not really surprising that the majority goes along to get along. Well, we know that that never works out, going along to get along, but in the end, but yeah, but if people can be steered in that way so easily without any pressure, yeah, okay, then nobody should be surprised.
That you really brought up some good points, because if that's true, which I'm sure there's people in the background within these, I don't want to say secret societies necessarily, but who already know this. They know the most probable outcome. Therefore, what is their plan of action and what are they doing now? And what would we be doing if we knew this in advance? How might we change our lives or live our lives? In hindsight, what would we do? Like, how much can we prepare? And it's kind of like the analogy of what they're saying, we are in a storm. Okay. We can't prevent the storm. The storm is as it is, it's coming. It's like a big hurricane. The best thing you can do is batten down the hatches, have your storm gear, be in a safe place, and know how to weather the storm, or like a ship at a storm at sea. And you got to have good balance and good skills and hopefully pre-knowledge of the storm. Just like, there's the pit in the road, and if your car can't take it, well, then you go around the pit in the road, provided you know that the pit is there, so you know how to maybe go around it. But many of us may not be able to do that. We're just going to have to weather the storm and, hope for the best with however that's going to turn out. And this is where we have to rely on the pure spiritual spontaneous wisdom, or even a miraculous, non-predictable thing, for whatever your fate is, or I don't even want to call it fate, or maybe it's a higher destiny, as opposed to a program. And that's where I think your own faith has to take place, and even realization. Like, I think the greater the faith you have, that really takes you through it. I wish I knew all the answers, to be honest.
Yeah, nobody does. But I think it is really, really important to keep our dignity during this time, not to become inhumane, to try to stay balanced as best as you can. And I think you will get, of course, you need to prepare. Yeah. If somebody still hasn't, I cannot help you.
Yeah. And sometimes you do your best you can, and you're still not really prepared because you don't truly have the resources that you wish you had. And you just have to pray for the grace of God to work in your life and do the best you can. But it takes great patience. And patience sometimes relies on, how well I feel physically. If I'm not doing well and I'm hungry and I'm sleep deprived and I'm sick and I don't have what I need as a human being, my patience is definitely tested, and I might just rant and rave and yell. And I don't want to go there. So a lot of it is like, how much of our human needs can we get met so that we don't fall into, going into a rage or crying or, spewing out, like, mouthing off,
Yeah. Have you seen the food riots in Sri Lanka?
No. What's going on? I don't watch a lot of the news because
they burned houses of politicians. I guess at least one policeman was killed. The people are so fed up with the police, with anything that reeks of government. Yeah, they are starving.
Oh God, that's horrible.
Yes. And this is just the beginning. I'm pretty sure it will not stay in Iran the same. They have food riots.
All those damn reptiles. I don't know. That they're they're
Yeah.
tweaking the knobs to force people into compliance. It's like, when they torture people, they try to break them so they can control the person. So it's always about control and loose feeding and,
Yeah, because everybody knows who is working in intelligence that intel that you gather from torture is usually worthless.
I guess it depends on what they're looking for. And
Yeah. But
I mean, it doesn't help.
Yeah.
It's just not good. But I just think it's once you're dealing with psychopaths, they're not likely to change their behaviors and they just get worse. So it's kind of like you have to know your enemy, I guess. Yeah.
And yourself.
Yes. Yeah.
These
Well,
are
that's
the two components.
Yeah.
If you do not know yourself,
Sometimes you don't know until you're hit with great misfortune and hit your rock bottom, your dark night of the soul. And I think a lot of us are going there collectively, where we're having to face things. And I wish it was easier. I really do.
I thought that I in the 60s, okay, I was a very little child, but still I can remember that time. And so what I thought today was, it started somewhat in the 60s, the personal liberation, self-realization, emancipation, and so on and so forth. So that continued in the 60s. But it also brought along, the destruction of the family fabric.
Yeah.
That was a fallout of that. And personally, I think that the social engineers aimed for that, for the destruction of the family unit.
Yeah.
And these days, what I'm experiencing is more that they are trying to steer us into a hive mind. So individualism is more frowned upon. And we have to go along with the herd. And if not, then in the near future we will get negative credit points.
Well, yeah, that stems from a lot of the communist countries, which goes back to the corrupted nature of an over idealized, you blend in with the whole, but they don't express the individuality at the extent of destruction of the personal sovereignty and psychological well-being, including women. So I always have to bring it back to the issue of what I see as a spiritual corruption. Like originally here, we're in a very corrupted realm where a lot of the origin is the disempowerment and devaluation of the feminine, so that the feminine cannot have any sense of equality and power within a relationship. So it's dominated by another force, which was taken over by dark spiritual forces, which kind of goes along with the fallen angel plan to corrupt religions and cultural traditions, such that the woman must always be controlled, manipulated, and abused, because she has the greatest power of intuitive reception of intuition and a certain kind of energy and life force creation. So that has to be controlled and manipulated by a dark force to begin with. And this actually I learned through, some of the satanic ritual abuse, deep secrets, even of what's in Druidism and some of these goddess traditions, unfortunately. So it was like a hijack of that which is good. So it's always controlled, or mostly controlled, by dark forces. So this is where, you have to have a healthy relationship by knowing what true love and equality and relating really is, which is essentially unknown and hasn't been practiced, except maybe more in recent history, or maybe in cultures that I'm not aware of, so that we can normalize that, so that the families can actually have a good quality. But it does go back to spiritual corruption. And now that I finally got it, I was able to connect a few dots on some levels that I hadn't seen before. I'm convinced deeply that this is a dark spiritual agenda that has definitely hijacked the feminine power for a reason, by dark forces to hold secrets. And a lot of this secrets is within sexual abuse and what happens in sexual abuse and spiritual sexual abuse, primarily women, and what women can do and be, but it has been hijacked by the ones who want to dominate the culture, basically by the fallen angels, to hijack and corrupt the original pure humans that were from God. So it's more and more evident to me every day, actually.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought when I compared it to the 60s, 70s, what is now going on, I thought, yeah, okay, here individualism, that was because we have a tendency as a species always to go overboard. We are very unbalanced. Yeah, individualism and self-realization, these are all wonderful things. And you do not have to go overboard, but we tend to do. And okay, then along with it came the destruction of the family. And I thought, look at that. How patient they are.
Oh, yes.
They take their time. They prepare it decades.
Yes. Hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. Yeah. And then they just let it roll out. And here we are, the total opposite.
That's a part of the amnesia, that in our short lifetimes, we don't remember, unless you remember your other lives and you have a stronger, deeper lucidity of your original nature, then you could start to kind of get an overview. And I think it's unfortunate that, we're in amnesia, so we can't learn from the history that we don't even know that's been faked, right? And so that's the hard part, is to recover our original memory and essence of being so that we could make those corrections. And it's, I wish it was easier. It's almost like there's an aspect of the human race. They think we've been, quote, hybridized so many times and genetically modified so that we have a nature that is unpredictable and actually difficult to purify. I don't want to say purify, but it's like, when they mix all the bloodlines and there's like this overriding, well, we see this in Breeding Out of the Love program, and we see it in what they call ponerology and psychopathology, where over many generations and lifetimes, you have certain lines that tend to be more easily corrupted with narcissistic personality disorder or addictions or just bad behaviors. And it's like deeply ingrained, maybe even in the genetic code or the energy body. And so that becomes more and more corrupted over time. So it's more and more difficult to bring forth the good qualities that makes it easier for them to even be balanced. So I know this from people who have, let's say, been involved in Satanism or vampirism, where they had the thirst for human blood, or sexual addictions to that which is corrupted by reptilians and some of these others who can deliberately manipulate the energy field and the sexual drive. So it's harder for them to overcome these drives within the human body and energy body that is actually unnatural and more difficult to overcome. So I think that's something about the human genome and the human body over how many, what do you call it, eons or thousands of years, that we might have been changed from whatever was our original blueprint, which hopefully that we can recover and return to. So it's easier to be, quote, remember who we are,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I would, that was the first great hour, Eve. Thank you so much for that. And I would say in closing of this hour, no matter what, before we jump on any bandwagon, we should make sure that we really understand, why am I doing this? Am I doing this because it's popular, because it has a nice sound, it's soothing my nerves, or so is it possible that I'm being manipulated here into passivity again?
Yes.
Yeah, just watch the show, you're being liberated. No,
yes.
You're not. You're being fooled.
Yeah, very good questions. We should always question. And based on our propensity, some are more passive, some are more aggressive. And yeah, and that takes, I think that takes a quality of humility and curiosity and essential goodness, if you ask me.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So that was it. And we see the patrons on the other side, and we will go into some very interesting things about milabs, fallen angels, and so on and so forth. Until next time, bye-bye.